Thank you very much for being on Universal this evening. We know how busy you are. If I start with the security issue in Somalia, how are we doing so far?
The security situation in Somalia is a pretty mixed picture, actually. There's been a lot of progress, obviously, compared to 12 months, 18 months ago. That's the good news. The bad news is that more recently, the security situation, particularly in Mogadishu, has suffered, and the incidence of terrorist attacks has increased. So I think it's very important that the international community should focus on supporting now the Somali National Security Forces and also supporting AMISOM to really redouble their efforts now against the terrorists in Somalia.
Since the AMISOM took over, there's a lot of death and destruction taking place in Mogadishu, let alone anywhere else. Are they failing to keep Mogadishu safe?
I think Mogadishu, as I say, compared to 12, 18 months ago, it has vastly improved. I mean, 18 months ago, then Al-Shabaab were largely in control of most of the city. That is definitely no longer the case. And so, on the whole, daily life is happening as I see, because I live in Mogadishu and I travel around Mogadishu daily, frequently. I can see everyday life is proceeding pretty normally. But that isn't to say that there are not incidents, and there are definitely in the last few months an increase in the horrendous atrocities being committed by Al-Shabaab against Somalis. Many Somalis, innocent Somalis, dying as a result of bomb attacks and suicide bombs and grenade attacks, etc. So this is a problem which has to be addressed.
Some people say that Somali National Army could take control over Mogadishu if they were well armed and well paid, because they know the local people and they know every street in Mogadishu, rather than the African Union who haven't got a clue and don't understand the language.
I think it's a joint effort that's happening already at the moment, and you're absolutely right. The Somali National Army and the Somali National Security Forces have a big role to play, and the international community are training numbers of Somalis now. I know the European Union, for example, has done a great job in training about 3,000 that have been trained and now returned to Mogadishu. And I think that is absolutely right. The long-term solution is to strengthen the Somali National Security Forces.
Part of my question that you didn't answer is they've been paid pennies rather than proper wages, so they can be proud of themselves and protect the country.
Yeah, I think, they're being paid stipends which international donors are putting together. I know the US, Turkey and others are paying, and I believe it translates very often to about $100 per month for a soldier, which I think the federal government has said is clearly, in their view, not as much as they would like to pay. But let's be realistic as well. $100 a month, when you've also got your food and sort of accommodation and things like that taken care of, it's probably a good basis for a beginning of a professional army.
Are you in favor of more troops to come to Somalia from AMISOM?
I believe that the experts from the African Union, United Nations, have been out recently looking at this question. They haven't yet produced their recommendations for the Peace and Security Council or the Security Council at the United Nations. So I think we have to wait and see what those recommendations are. But from where I sit, it certainly seems to me apparent that we need extra effort militarily against Al-Shabaab, and that is very likely to involve extra forces.
Sexual violence against the Somali woman is on the rise. What are you guys doing about it on the ground?
You're absolutely right. The problem of sexual violence is significant and horrendous, and this is something which, again, the federal government of Somalia has also recognized and is central to its roadmap, which the UN independent expert was out recently in Mogadishu and discussed and has agreed with the federal government on that. It's a problem which is going to require a multifaceted approach. I mean, it really obviously requires a functioning judiciary and justice system. It requires a lot of education and awareness changing. And it requires specific training of forces. And certainly the Somali National Security Forces being trained by international partners and the AMISOM forces before they're being deployed are given now thorough human rights training, including the rights of women as well.
There was this allegation involving a Somali mother who had been raped allegedly by the American forces, and no one has been brought to justice, which you yourself spoke about when this, I think it was middle of August, when this took place. What is going on?
Yep, it's a very concerning case. The allegations are very serious allegations. I know the government and AMISOM together set up a joint investigation to that. I haven't yet seen the results of that joint investigation. I hope that when it is produced, that report, it will be thorough and comprehensive, and then we will have a good idea of what's happened. But until we see that, then we don't really know. But it is very important that it's properly investigated. And I'm also aware, unfortunately, that in Somalia, the capability and the capacity for doing such thorough and detailed investigations is also lacking. And that's, again, part of the capacity building which we need to address.
Federalism, how is it going to work in practice in Somalia in terms of sharing power, revenue, resources and responsibility?
This is something absolutely fundamental, and it's something absolutely fundamental that Somalis themselves have to agree. This is not a blueprint that is imposed or can be imposed by the international community. We as the United Nations are there to help facilitate the process by which Somalis themselves will make an agreement about how to do that. You're absolutely right, it's challenging, and over the last 22 years, because of the civil war and the disintegration of the country, power, control of resources has fragmented and dispersed, and I think everybody recognizes going back to a single central government, a unitary sort of power system like that isn't going to be possible, which is why in the Provisional Federal Constitution, Somalis agreed that it should be a federal system. Working out the detail of that now is the real challenge.
On your report, you spoke about Puntland having lack of confidence in the central government. What is the problem?
Puntland having a lack of confidence?
Confidence building within the federal government. There is a dispute among themselves, basically.
There is clearly a dispute between Puntland and the federal government, and there is also a political issue within Puntland itself, where I happened to be in Puntland just ahead of the local and district elections, which were scheduled in August, and it was apparent then that the political and security conditions were not right for holding that. And the government of Puntland suspended that electoral process, which I think was the right decision, because what it spoke to was the fact that there was a degree of reconciliation still needed within Puntland itself. And that is continuing and must continue up to January, when there will be elections for the new president, parliament, and then president of Puntland. The relationship between the federal government and the federal state of Puntland, you're right, is a complex one. I think in recent weeks it perhaps improved, and I was very pleased to see in Brussels that President Faroli was there as the president of the only federal state so far existing within Somalia, and as a part of the federal government of Somalia's delegation there. I think that showed really beginning of a much better relationship between the two, and I certainly urge both parties to continue along that route.
Early next year there will be election in Puntland, and a lot of people are talking about it, as you know. Are you confident it will be a fair and free election?
The election is going to be, again, through the clan-based elders system, selecting members of parliament who will then vote for the president, and that is as much as seems to be politically possible now within Puntland. And it's very important that that is done in a way that is thoroughly inclusive, and that the elders shoulder the responsibility, great responsibility that's put upon them, to make sure that the MPs that they select are truly representative, inclusive, and selected according to real merit. And also the position of women should well be respected within that, and a suitable number of women should be a part of that process.
Let's go to Somaliland. In your report, and I quote, you said the relationship between Somalia and Somaliland is sensitive and fragile.
It is indeed, yes. As you well know, Somaliland for some time now has aspired to independence and maintains that it is an independent country. Now, clearly, the international community as a whole recognises the territorial integrity and sovereignty of Somalia. And now that poses an issue and a set of challenges for the relationship with the federal government and also the relationship with the international community. But I think again on that, the positive point is that there is a process now of dialogue that is underway, and the government of Turkey deserves great credit for facilitating that and bringing the two sides together. We certainly as the United Nations encourage that and applaud the progress that they've made so far, and we look forward to the next round of talks I gather scheduled for the end of October. And I think that is the way forward for the two entities to discuss, essentially starting with issues of very mutual interest, and they've discussed, for example, airspace management and made an agreement about that, and through that process build up sufficient confidence between themselves that at some stage they then may be able to address some of the more fundamental status issues.
Right. You said that Turkish government deserves credit for it, but Turkish government did not address the core matter here. They were talking about sharing resources and stuff like that. What Somalia were talking about is whether Somaliland will be part of Somalia or independent Somaliland, despite the problems that they're facing and the other parties are facing. Would you offer support Somaliland to be independent from the rest of Somaliland? 2 successful elections, peace and stability, which you mentioned in your own report, and all they're crying for is to be independent from the rest of Somalia. Would you offer support that?
The United Nations and the mission which I have the privilege to head is of course mandated by the United Nations Security Council, and it's the member states of the Security Council and the member states of the United Nations that will decide on the status of countries and whether they're recognized or not recognized. As far as I understand, there is no country that recognizes Somaliland. No member of the United Nations recognizes them. No member of the United Nations Security Council recognizes them. And therefore I have to perform and fulfill the mandate that's been given to me by the Security Council.
Some of the Somaliland local authorities rejected the UN mandate in Somaliland to enter Somaliland. Who are these local authorities who are overruling the president and the rest of the country?
The government of Somaliland.
They're the one that rejecting it?
Yes.
From the top?
From the top, yes.
A lot of Somali people say that IGAD is part of the problem, not the solution. In particular, Ethiopia and Kenya, which are the driving force of the Somali politics day to day, calling Somali leaders and clan leaders to Addis Ababa to divide and rule and create division the rest of the Somalia.
I think it's very important that the region as a whole is involved in finding a solution to the Somalia crisis that's existed over the last 22 years. And of course, Somalia itself is a member of IGAD. So it is working with its peers and with its fellow members of that grouping. And I think the role that's being played is very positive. We've certainly welcomed the role that IGAD played in Addis Ababa with the reaching of the interim Juba administration agreement. And of course, many of the IGAD members are troop contributing countries to AMISOM as well. I have absolutely no doubt that they are working in the interests of stability and unity of Somalia.
My final question to you is that, as you know, so many Somali reporters and journalists have been killed and murdered in Mogadishu and up and down the country. How can we have to make sure that Somali journalists are being respected and well treated?
I think it's absolutely right that the freedom of the press and respect for journalists should run deep and strong, and this is something which Somalia is beginning to come to terms with. I believe that once the Independent Human Rights Commission is established, and I think the government is very committed to doing that, then this is again the sort of issue which the Human Rights Commission will be able to take up too. The United Nations will absolutely continue to support journalists who are doing their professional and independent work, and if there are cases of journalists being persecuted or suffering violence from extremists, the United Nations will be the very first to raise their voice against.
Secretary General, thank you very much for being on Universal.
Thank you very much
Thank you.
indeed. All right.